Hi, thanks for joining me today on Stand on Guard. This is your host, David Krayden, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Ottawa, our nation's capital. When I come back, we're going to describe the latest outrage in Canada. And this is a land grab. This is looting. This is theft. This is what Canada has become. We'll be back in mere moments.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please like the station and subscribe if you haven't, resubscribe if you need to. Hope you enjoyed the interview yesterday with Neil Oliver. I always enjoy talking to Neil. And it's slowly climbing. It didn't get the immediate numbers because I think that's crazy. It was just a fascinating conversation with Neil. He's always a favorite on this show. And I know a lot of you appreciate it. Just need to have a few more appreciate it. So the BC land grab. And I don't know where to start with this. Jamie Sarkanock at the National Post. This is exactly what I was thinking. So, if my talk seems a little bit similar to what Jamie's saying here, this is exactly where we are in this country. This is what reconciliation looks like. It's the abrogation of property rights. You have to remember, the Canadian Constitution, Charter of Rights, doesn't really guarantee property rights. It's implied. We don't have a right to life, liberty, and property in this country. And that's intentional because I don't think Pierre Trudeau really believed in property rights, in private property. And, here we are again. Rob Shaw, BC court ruling puts Aboriginal title above private property rights. Now, I'm going to show a report from Global News on this because I think it puts it in perspective. But the government of British Columbia is actually appealing this. And people have been saying to me, well, why would the Premier David Eby, who is Mr. Reconciliation, he was in the same category as former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, why would he be appealing this? Doesn't he believe in Aboriginal title above all else? Isn't he a reconciliation person? Well, they thought they could get away with this, that no judge would really rule. In this instance here, this is a large chunk of Richmond. This is a land grab. This is theft. This is looting. And there's absolutely no way a country can survive if private property, or can't survive as a democracy if private property is not sacrosanct. We've got to move on from things that happened centuries ago. I said years ago we need the abolition of the reserve system in this country. It's apartheid. We need equality under the law. All people, regardless of race or ethnicity, should be equal under the law. We should not have any race-based fishing, hunting, or legal system. We need to be equal under the law. And I grew up on the west coast of British Columbia, where this is not in Richmond, where this is being felt, but on Vancouver Island. I had great friends who were First Nations people. I was very close to the vice president of the Native Council of Canada, Bill Wilson. And I always said, if any Native person who really wanted to succeed got off the reserve and acted like any other Canadian citizen, and that's what I still say. And who's going to benefit from this land title? Do you think, why are people on reserves constantly suffering from malnutrition, alcohol abuse, some cases starvation, bad water? It's because the chiefs soak up all the money, and they've always done that. That's always been the case. And the average native person on these reserves really never sees anything from the government largesse that pours out. And in many cases, I think of Ipperwash in Ontario, paid the native man 3 times for that property and then gave it back in the end anyway. So they had their cake and ate it too. And this is what's going to happen throughout British Columbia if this is not struck down. And it needs to be. This is a complete abrogation of property rights, basic freedoms in this country. And it is just beyond reason. Do you think anyone's going to want to move to British Columbia if their land can be taken away from some local First Nations band who says, hey, it's ours? I remember when I was in university, my journalism professor saying, do you realize Vancouver is claimed by 110% of Vancouver is claimed by First Nations because of overlapping claims. So what? We just give it all away because maybe some injustice occurred at the beginning? We need to move on. This is not reconciliation. This is sellout. Reconciliation means we all get together, and that's all it means. We all get along, and we're all equal. That's reconciliation. That's not what Justin Trudeau means by reconciliation. He means sellout. He means give it away. And he means if you work that land, you bought that land, you live on that land, too bad. Aboriginal title trumps your private property rights. And that's not a country that I want to live in. Let's have a look at this report from Global.
While the celebration of an historic and precedent-setting court ruling was taking place here in Duncan, the impact.
You notice how it's always presented like they're just always solemn, and this is somehow a religious thing, and it's nothing to do with taking people's land away. It's some solemn event. It's making things right historically. This is always how this is presented by the mainstream media.
Is being felt 90 kilometers away across the water.
The courts remain an option for First Nations when we are not heard and our rights are ignored.
What rights are ignored? You have rights to everybody else's land? You really believe that, do you? No, I'm sorry. That's not how it works. And that's not how it should work. Maybe it works that way in Canada, but it better stop working that way.
We did not pursue this case with malice or ill will.
The BC Supreme Court finding the Cowichan tribes have the right to 7.5 square kilometers.
All right, there it is. Ports are included. You bet. So where's it going to end? That's just the beginning, my friends. That's just the beginning. There will be sections of mainland Vancouver, of metropolitan Vancouver, that will be claimed. And if this is any indication how the legal system, how the judges are going to rule, how the courts are going to rule, they'll get whatever they want because they have Aboriginal title. This is a dangerous precedent. It has to be struck down.
Of their old grounds, now part of Richmond, determining land titles previously granted by governments, including private property, are, quote, defective and invalid.
We're not here to fight against anyone. We're here to ensure that history is in its right place, that history is corrected.
The BC government will be appealing this decision, and ultimately it is expected to end up in the Supreme Court of Canada. Eby, in a statement last week, says he is deeply concerned around the ramifications of this ruling on individual private property rights.
The ruling could have significant unintended consequences for fee simple private property rights in BC, and that must be reconsidered. It'll be amongst the arguments that we will be making.
Except these aren't unintended consequences. These are intended consequences. This is about who controls land in BC, and this will spread across Canada. So it's intended. And you people, this government of British Columbia, this socialist NDP government, understood this. This is where you knew it was going. But you wanted to pretend it was going to be, nobody was ever going to actually ratify or affirm these outrageous claims. But they have. So what does that mean? Businesses will leave Vancouver and British Columbia because their land could be stolen from them. People will move out of BC and will not come to BC because their land, their private property could be stolen.
In our application for appeal.
On Monday, both the Cowichan and the provincial government expressed an interest to talk face-to-face, but experts say the province's deals with other First Nations complicate the issue.
So you look at the Haida Recognition Act, where they themselves voluntarily, outside of courts, overlaid Aboriginal title on private land. Those two things are fundamentally irreconcilable.
Conservative leader John Rustad says this ruling, even with an appeal, will already have a significant impact.
These title cases, particularly now with private land, has put an incredible chill on British Columbia, on the ability to invest.
With the legal cases continuing, the Cowichan tribes will now have to wait, drawing this out after they, in their words, have waited more than 150 years due to government lawlessness. Richard Zussman, Global News, Duncan.
And Keith Baldry is here with more on this. Keith, it's a tough position for the provincial government to be in. What are the implications we're looking at here for the NDP?
Yeah, it was apparent very quickly upon release of this judgment on Friday in conversations and texts with cabinet ministers, senior government officials. This appeal was a no-brainer. The NDP could not risk being seen as not taking on or opposing a judgment that so blurs the lines between Aboriginal title and private property rights. So it was just a matter of time before the NDP was going to launch this appeal. We expected it today, as early as today, and that's certainly what happened. Attorney General Nikki Sharma says her legal team thinks there's a considerable number of grounds here to support an appeal. And she also says the government's still willing to sit down and negotiate some sort of settlement. Here's the Attorney General.
Our team is working through what we think are quite a few grounds of appeal, potential grounds of appeal. It's not unlike many very complicated cases related to rights and title that make their way through many appeals and usually through to the highest courts of the land to help us all clarify legal issues that we need to have clarified by the courts. In the meantime, we are open to sitting down with nations in this province to make sure that we can come to agreement in a more certain way through our reconciliation work.
So it's also not clear yet whether other parties will appeal this. Of course, the BC government was just one of 6 parties in this land claims fight. We also have the City of Richmond, the federal government, the Vancouver Port Authority, the Tawasin Indian Band, and the Musqueam Indian Band. And we talked to Chief Wayne Sparrow of the Musqueam on Friday. He was quite upset over this ruling. So it remains to be seen where others will join BC in appealing this landmark decision.
All right, thanks for that, Keith.
So, private property is not something that's just a nice thing to have. It's not just something that's a luxury. It is absolutely integral to a free economy. If you don't have private property, you live in a socialist country. You live in a communist country. This is Bolshevism. And this has to be struck down. But this is a result of decades of reconciliation propaganda, that you are guilty for things that happened centuries ago. That I am guilty, you are guilty of bad negotiation, of abusing First Nations people, of being so wrong that we have to give them whatever they want today. And as I say, this has nothing to do with racism. Because I'm saying we don't want a race-based country. We want equality under the law no matter what the color of your skin, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter where you came from. That's the kind of country I want to live in. Not where we judge people and give special status to anybody because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity. That is completely wrong and destructive to our Canadian democracy, whatever we have left of that. Justin Trudeau knew what he was doing. David Eby was supporting this. He knows he can't do anything right now except appeal because he'll look like an idiot. He knows this could mean the life or death of the province. This is, I think, the most important story of the week. And before I turn to the other one, I want to say we're going to be watching this because I have been dealing with this issue for the last 20 years. I've been writing about this and saying, oh, we've got to get Canada off race-based systems. The old Reform Party used to know this was wrong. I'd like to know what the Conservative Party of Canada is going to say about this, if anything. It will be interesting. Now, let's revisit another incredible story. And I want to correct something I said the other day, because Newfoundland is not exactly framing the don't go for a hike in the woods today legislation the way that New Brunswick and Nova Scotia are. Newfoundland and Labrador actually is looking at potential fires and saying, you cannot light fires. It's Nova Scotia and New Brunswick that have gone completely off the rails. And let's listen to this again, and we'll listen to an update from Premier Susan Holt.
Province is in an unprecedented situation, and it is getting worse. So we're here on a Saturday afternoon to ask all New Brunswickers to get out of the woods and to stay out of the woods.
So as we said, we have taken decisive action to help address this situation. Yesterday, we announced we would increase fines for violating the forest fire regulations. And as I said today, we'll share the details. So effective today, new fines will range from $50,000 to $150,000. For a first offense, when a ticket is issued, fines will increase from $75 to $50,000.
Okay, so Hogan here, John Hogan, Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, is focusing on lighting fires, not going for a hike in the woods. But I think the fines are a little bit crazy, but at least he's not telling people don't go for a hike in the woods. And I was wrong about that the other day. I wanted to correct that.
Imprisonment in default of payment will increase from 3 days to up to 6 months. For a subsequent offense, fines will increase from $150 to $75,000. Imprisonment for not paying will increase from 6 days to up to 6 months. Where there's a summons issued, a first offense, fines will increase from $500 to $50,000 to $100,000 range, and imprisonment will increase from up to 3 months to up to 1 year. For a subsequent offense, fines increase from a minimum of $1,000 to $75,000 to $150,000, and imprisonment in default will be increased from up to 3 months from up to 1 year. It's very clear that these penalties for violating the regulations needed to be higher, and everyone needs to take this very seriously. And I think it's very clear that the size of the increases and the penalties, including imprisonment, that we mean business, and we want people to listen and take this seriously. Increasing fines is one tool we have in our toolbox to protect innocent Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, their families, and their communities, which is why we have taken that step. I also understand, and I've seen there's a lot of information on social media, and some, of course, is true, but as I warned earlier this week, some is untrue. So I want to continue to encourage people to get their information from official and trusted sources, such as Government of Newfoundland and Labrador websites and social media, the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and Agriculture, and Newfoundland and Labrador Health Services. And I also want to encourage people to follow Dr. Fitzgerald's advice when it comes to air quality.
I hope folks become aware of that, look at it and say, do I really want to have my family impacted by that through a $100,000 fine or 6 months in prison? That's where this have landed. My final comment: the Resource Enforcement Division of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Agriculture, Fisheries, Forestry and Agriculture encourages those. We continue. If you know anything, if you are aware in any way of suspicious activity, please call our line at 729-2192, 729-2192.
On the fines, so between $50,000 and $150,000, how did we arrive at those numbers, and why did you decide to go that high with those?
So we looked at other fines, I guess, across the country. We certainly looked at where ours were, and they were incredibly low. And that's not surprising given the fact that, wildfire season like this certainly wasn't contemplated when that legislation was drafted. I mean, times changed, and here we are now. I think it was definitely appropriate to increase the fines by a serious, significant amount, not only to send a message that we mean business, but to punish individuals in the event that they do break the regulation. So, those laws and those penalties always have several factors into why we arrive where they are, and it's for.
Before we get to Premier Susan Holt from New Brunswick, which is absolutely crazy, encourage you, please share this broadcast with your friends and family. YouTube has its thumb on this broadcast like they love to do at the beginning of the week. Please share it with your friends and family, and because I tell you, YouTube won't do it for me. But this is an incredible, I haven't got the question in here from one of the reporters who asks, what do you say to people in New Brunswick who are furious with you because you're saying they can't even go for a hike in the woods because that's somehow creating dangerous situations? And this reveals, I think, the mentality of these people. And I'll ask you before we play it, what does it remind you of? How does this premier talk in a way that you've just recently heard in the last last 3 or 4 years? It reminded me of something. We'll get into that in a minute.
Going for a walk in the woods is going to cause a fire. I can understand why people think that that's ridiculous. But the reality is, it's not that you might cause a fire. It's that if you're out there walking in the woods and you break your leg, we're not going to come and get you, because we have emergency responders that are out focused on a fire that is threatening the lives of New Brunswickers. And if you take your boat out fishing in a pond in Crown Land and you capsize, we're not going to be able to come and help you out, because our first responders are focused on an immediate and serious threat to our province. And so it's the possibility of diverting emergency resources away from where they are really needed.
So what does that remind you of? COVID. Yes, during COVID, you didn't get your vaccine, which we all said was safe and effective. You're out of luck if you need medical help, because it's your own fault. Here we go. So if you're walking in the woods, it's your own fault if something happens to you. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know how many times I've walked in the woods in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, yes, even the Maritimes, and I've never broken a leg. I would probably have a greater likelihood of breaking a leg if I walked through the market area in downtown Ottawa, because it's so crazy now with people running around on drugs, homeless people, people who have absolutely nothing to do except start fights, raise hell. And that's the mark. So I think I'd have probably a greater likelihood of getting a broken leg downtown Ottawa than I would going for a hike. And capsizing a boat, well, let's put it this way. If you capsize a boat in an isolated area and you're a long ways out, unless you're an excellent swimmer, you're probably going to be in serious trouble, because the rescue people won't be there in time. So these are all moot points, but this is exactly where these people are going. I've got more great stuff for you here in a minute, but I wanted to show you our merchandise. I'll be right back. Yes, and you can get that merchandise. Go to the store. Thank you for everybody who's been supporting that merchandise lately. It helps in so many ways. It really does. Before I forget, Jason Levine, a good friend of mine who has a podcast in Alberta, was out here. My goodness, I guess it was a couple of months back now, and he interviewed me in Ottawa about current events. We talked about the potential for Alberta separatism, and the potential for Alberta independence. And that interview is airing tonight on Jason's show. I'll put the information in the description. And I haven't seen the edited version of this clip, but rest assured, if you get the wrong idea from what Jason put out on X today, I did not take a position on Alberta separation. I don't live in Alberta. I have said it's up to the people who live in Alberta to decide their future. And I also have said the debate around Alberta independence is probably good for Canada because this country is going to hell in a handbasket. And anything that shakes up this country and disturbs the absolute indifference so many Canadians have to the catastrophe that's waiting for this country if we keep going the way of Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney, I think that's good to have that debate. But as I pointed out several times, I'm a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. It's hard for me to support any independence movement. I will certainly look at it objectively, but it's not my position. It's not my place to be an advocate on either side of this. I just want to see both sides have the same access to media attention and get the same fairness and quality of reporting. And I think I've done that. We've had Jeffrey Rath of the Alberta Prosperity Project on this show several times to talk about why separation is so viable, why it's so popular. And the last thing I'm ever going to do is suggest that, nobody's really behind. No, these are all fringe people who support this. No, these are normal Albertans who are sick and tired of the way Canada is being run. And they want a real alternative, which they don't see in federalism as it's currently constituted, with what many people would describe as a uniparty. So that's my position on this. And I want to make that quite clear. I love this. Somebody sent this post to me replying to something I said. You know what's next? I mean, and this is incredible. I'm sorry, it's a little microscopic here, but insurance premiums, generating credit scores with algorithms. And what's going to be dependent on these credit scores? This is what's called social credit in China. Insurance premiums, access to luxury hotels, travel abroad, school admissions and scholarships, access to planes and high-speed trains, access to social services, loan rates and amounts. Your bad social credit risk, interest rates go up for you. Access to internet services. We don't like what you're doing with the internet. We don't like the sites you're visiting. We don't like what you're broadcasting. So you're not going to have internet access. This is absolutely possible. Eligibility for government jobs. Well, that's not something I would ever want anymore. But we're actually in a situation now where this is on the horizon. And it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. And wanted to mention that there's I'm paying particular attention to the Alaska summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, because I think this could be a game changer for the war in Ukraine. I think this could be the end of the war. And I think this will end at least with the acknowledgement that Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO, should never have asked, and NATO should never have promised it could be. So I think that's going to be history from now on. And that there'll be other things that a lot of Russia-phobes won't like. But it's time to acknowledge the war is over. Ukraine has lost the war. And I think they'll be lucky to get what they can out of this, because they're down to virtually nobody in the population who's capable of fighting. They got 16-year-olds fighting now, 65-year-olds. The slaughter has to stop. It's like the First World War. It is horrendous. And of course, as I've said many times, this did not begin 2 or 3 years ago. This began in 2014 with a coup d'etat that was engineered by the CIA so that a pro-Russian regime was replaced by an anti-Russian regime and a pro-NATO regime. And as I've said, I don't know how many times, as the Soviet Union was imploding, NATO promised Mikhail Gorbachev that there would be no expansion of NATO, not 1 inch eastward. NATO broke that promise almost immediately. Here's some insanity I showed yesterday when I was talking to Neil Oliver, if you missed it. Mike Huckabee, you know Mike Huckabee. He was a Republican presidential candidate, or he was a candidate. He was not the nominee. He didn't have the support. This is a former governor of Arkansas, pastor, evangelical Christian. And I can't believe how incredibly deluded Mike Huckabee has become, because he's justifying what's been happening in Gaza with the bombing of Dresden in February, I think it was, 1945. This was a city full of people on the run, of people trying to escape the bombing from the larger cities like Berlin and Hamburg and Frankfurt and Nuremberg. So they went to Dresden thinking they could get away from the bombing, largely women and children as well. And the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Corps, or Army Air Force at that time, bombed the city literally into a shell. Perhaps 100,000 people died in the firestorms. Nothing left of a city that went back to the Middle Ages. And it had absolutely no military value. There was nothing there that was posing any kind of military threat. It was simply to punish ordinary people. And it was so vindictive. And I would say it was a war crime, yes. So why is Mike Huckabee saying Dresden was a great thing, and so was what happens in Israel with the way Israel has behaved, the Israeli Defense Force has behaved in Gaza? That's fine too, because Dresden was good. There's something wrong with that vision. There's something wrong with the way Mike Huckabee is now viewing the world, and it worries me because I used to have a lot of time for Mike Huckabee. So I wanted to mention that at the tail end of this broadcast here. We'll be back again tomorrow with more information on wildfires. Why aren't provinces investing more money in firefighting equipment and water bombers? Why aren't they investigating arson? Why are they just saying, don't go into the woods today? What's going on? We're going to be examining that with greater depth tomorrow, because it indicates a lot about where this country is going and how this country increasingly thinks. And so I think that's going to be well worth watching. So thank you for watching today, folks. It's always a pleasure to come to you. You've been watching Stand on Guard with David Krayden, broadcasting to you live, as I always do, with rare exceptions, from our nation's capital in Ottawa. And I'll be back again tomorrow, same time. Catch me tonight on the Levine Show, and we'll have information in the description about that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all tomorrow.